Hello and welcome to Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is all about mindset. Here's a quote from Henry David Thoreau that I think is going to set the stage for the work we really want to do in this chapter. As a single footstep will not make a path on the earth, so a single thought will not make a pathway in the mind. To make a deep physical path, we walk again and again. To make a deep mental path, we must think over and over the kind of thoughts we wish to dominate our lives. So the lesson that we are really going to talk about in this chapter is the power of consistency and repetition when we're thinking new thoughts and when we're reprogramming ourselves. And what's going to be really interesting about this approach is how to pair it with our emotional and sensitive selves. So if you're used to being, let's say, run by your emotions or informed by your emotions to the point where they overwhelm you or they are the kind of deciding factor of your choice, what we're going to start to introduce this idea that you can think new thoughts, new attitudes, new beliefs, and they might not feel as true as some of the more negative or habitual thoughts, but it's okay that they don't feel true. What we want to do is just make sure that they are aligned with your values and your goals, and then work to reinforce them with repetition. So we're going to take all of that and unpack it and try to simplify it and to really bring it home so it's something that you can use. So let's first start talking about mindset. What's important to understand is that our brains are what's called neuroplastic. Honestly, up until the late 1990s or sometime in the 90s, it was considered that we only get so many brain cells and that you don't make any more. For a long time, science and medicine did not think that our brains can change. And now we know that is 100% wrong. Our brains reshape and prune away neural pathways all the time. And so we often kind of use our brains and compare it to like a computer, so that sometimes we need to do updates, sometimes we need to clean out viruses, sometimes we need to defrag, but we can reprogram ourselves. And how that works literally in the brain is that when you think a new thought, brain cells, neurons, actually come together and form a pathway. And then the more often you think that thought, the thicker that pathway goes. So now in a compulsive thought or a very common negative thought, that almost becomes like an automatic train track. It's a loop that we can get really stuck on. So our brains, we work best or we change best not by trying to unlearn things, but by teaching our brain something new. So despite the thick, heavy pathway over here, we want to focus on growing a new pathway over in a different part of ourselves. And so that's an oversimplified, but kind of like a visual way to understand how we reprogram ourselves. Another way to say that is what we focus on grows. So that can be if we're focusing on something negative, let's say something related to body image. If you are overly focused on not liking your hips, almost every time you look in the mirror, if you're looking at your hips, that's going to be your main internal experience and thought process. And so what we want to try to teach ourselves is that when you look in the mirror, that you either look at your face or you look at your whole shape, but you train your eyes not to be looking at that problem area. And that's just an example with body image. But we want to be able to change and direct what we focus on. And where it's helpful to understand also what we mean by like automatic thoughts. So the brain, when it learns something, when it's done something often enough, it gets put essentially into like the subconscious mind. It's made like a shortcut to something that is now automatic. And so to me, an example of that is learning to tie your shoes. At first, when you tie your shoe, you have to learn each little step of the way. But after a while, you've done it often enough, it now becomes automatic and you can tie your shoe with your eyes closed. In fact, it's probably kind of hard to articulate how to tie your shoe. It's just this automatic thing that you know how to do. So the inner critic is actually very similar to that. It's something you've done often enough, criticize yourself often enough that it comes up, it's automatic, it's quick. You don't think to yourself, I'm going to make myself feel bad. Let me think a negative thought. It's more like, you drop your coffee and then you're like, oh, why am I always so dumb in the morning? It's automatic, it's repetitious. But even with those thoughts, we can break those down, we can prune those away, we can teach our brain new ways of being is through repetitious new thoughts and also really working with like our values and our attitudes. So what's most important in this process is to maintain an attitude or a way of being of curiosity and compassion. Because if you move into shame or judgment or criticism about yourself as you're going through this process, it'll slow you down. It's going to throw you off track. So the more you can just be curious and compassionate about your thought processes, and in some ways even not take them so seriously, that's going to make a real difference. So that's kind of my number one tip for this chapter. Why do I bring up compassion? Compassion is loving, it's firm, it's assertive, and it doesn't engage in pity. And so when I'm talking about being curious and compassionate with yourself, I'm talking about honoring the truth of your lived experiences, your challenges, and your hardships without allowing yourself to move into collapse or victimhood. And so compassion can allow us to courageously touch the center of our sorrow, but without falling into drama. And compassion is what's required so that we can discern like when to push and when to rest. It gives us the ability to hold conflicting experiences, the good, the bad, the soft, the hard, the sweet, and the sour. So compassion is a real steadying kind of emotional attitude to hold for this throughout this chapter, throughout this whole class. So here's an example with mindset. When we think about people talking about an optimist and a pessimist, we think about, is the cup half full or half empty? And the truth is they're both true. Which way of looking at the world is going to bring you the most peace? If they're both true, then you get to choose how you want to interpret this world. Do you want to look at the world as half full or half empty? And what we're really talking about here is our ability to reframe how we see things. The RAS, reticular activating system, that is a function of our brain that filters our attention. And what that means is we program our RAS through things like our values, our goals, several different things. So for example, let's take a sports car. If you're really into sports cars, you've programmed your brain that this is a valuable thing for you. And if you're driving down the highway and a fancy car drives by, your brain's going to notice that. The RAS lets that into your awareness. Now, for me, I'm not interested in sports cars. That same car could move by me on the highway and I won't even notice it. I'll know a car moved past me, but that's all I'm going to notice. It's actually not going to come further into my consciousness about the make, the model, or that kind of thing. Basically, our brain is filtering in thousands of bits of information all day long about our world, but only some of it actually comes up into our conscious awareness. And so that's our filter, and we want to work to reprogram our filter. If you have a negative belief that the world is unsafe, or you're always getting screwed, and that is how you see the world, then that means the brain is literally filtering out and showing you evidence of how that is true. It's going to show you more experiences in your day about how the world is against you. And you can, if you choose, work to reprogram your brain. This is where like gratitude practices are really the science behind that. When you have a gratitude practice of saying, at the end of every day, I want to list 5 things I'm grateful for. That teaches the brain that throughout the day, it has to actually look for things to be grateful for. And it can be small things, but that starts to change what our brain filters our environment and brings to our attention. And that's why two people can be in the same room, in the same environment, and have relatively different experiences and interpretations of what's going on. So if you're in a noisy environment and you're trying to focus on a conversation with your friend, the RAS is also going to be able to filter out that background noise and help you focus on what your friend is saying. So the RAS does a lot of different things for us in our day-to-day. And it's a subconscious process that we can work with if we so choose. It's estimated that we think about 70,000 thoughts a day. And if you sleep 6 or 8 hours, that's about 4,375 thoughts an hour, or 72 thoughts a minute. So not all of those thoughts are good, solid thoughts. And I like to think, we often say you can't believe everything you read, or you can't believe everything on the internet. We also can't believe everything we think. Sometimes our brain is just spitting out thoughts, and some are more valuable than others. And so to be able to start to create this experience where you understand that you are more than your thoughts. And that is where you're going to get a lot of control and agency in how you experience and move through this world, regardless or in addition to just the things that happen to you. We have a choice about how we respond to them. One of the opening statements that is really useful when it comes to mindset is these two phrases: I'm willing to see this differently, or I'm learning to listen to my body. So you don't have to convince yourself that I love my body or I know the world is safe. You can begin with a middle statement, a more neutral statement that says, I am willing to see this differently. And that right there begins to open things up within our how our brain works and what it filters through as far as what it allows into our consciousness as far as our lived experience. One of the helpful ways to start to understand, or a metaphor for understanding how our brain works, is to think about our brain as it has a lot of different radio stations. So you've got country, you've got punk, you've got like news radio, soft rock, classic rock. So you got all these radio stations. On at least an old-fashioned radio, you used to be able to like move the dial from station to station. Sometimes in between there'd be static. And then you can also turn the volume up or down. So that's also true for our own thought processes. You might have a radio station we might call the inner critic. And you might have a radio station called the compassionate self, the wise self. So what you want to be able to learn to do or hold an idea around is that you can change what you're listening to. It's almost as if you could raise your antenna to a different level of inner talk and focus on that. So when it comes to things like the inner critic, imagine being able to turn the volume down, and then imagine being able to turn the station. So sometimes with something like an invisible process like our thoughts, being able to use something that, a metaphor like a radio station, that really is a way that we can start to engage our brain and help us have a tangible idea of how it works. Because emotions, thoughts, these are all invisible things that are very hard to measure, and yet we do have control and access around them. So being able to compare it to something that's a lot more tangible, that helps us begin to really learn how to interact with these invisible parts of ourselves. And this is where we also want to start to talk about the science of affirmations. Now, a pet peeve of affirmations is this idea that it's kind of like magical thinking. If you tell yourself every day that you're going to win the lottery kind of thing, that'll make you rich. That's maybe a whole topic for another day, but what we really want to take about is affirmations and the science of just reprogramming our brain. That ability to say, I'm willing to see this differently, or I'm willing to have new ideas about myself. These kinds of things, when we start to use affirmations, we're using conscious ideas. I want to have new ideas about myself. And we're starting to use that as a way to counterbalance the subconscious thoughts. The subconscious thought doesn't think, it just reacts. It's like autopilot. And so what we're trying to do here is to bring things into consciousness. We want to be really specific and choosy with our new thoughts. And that's why when we pair these new thoughts, we want to pair them, if we can, with feeling. You can imagine those inner critic thoughts are paired with quite a lot of feeling, and that's what makes them feel so strong. So a new thought, such as I'm willing to see myself differently, when we first say that to ourselves, it might not have so much feeling with it, but with repetition, the feelings will grow. We often don't have feelings associated with new thoughts because they're new thoughts. We don't have a relationship with these thoughts. They're not yet at that level of belief yet. So what you often want to do is find the part of you that does resonate with this new thought, this idea of let's just say I'm learning to like myself. Even if most of you doesn't agree or like that, imagine that even there's a minority part. There's a small part of you, maybe even a whisper, that does like that idea. And what we want to do is start to resonate, or almost feel like you could talk from the part of you that wants to bring this new idea, this new programming into being. So it's okay if if it doesn't feel 100% true. We want to acknowledge that like nothing's 100% true, and that a lot of this reprogramming work is learning how to resonate and connect with those parts. I often call it like the minority voices, because that wisdom self or the higher self or the future self, they often have been pushed away, and they're often pretty quiet. So as we start to talk with them, they will get stronger and they will start to develop some more feelings or resonance, but it takes a little while. Another good example actually where people are pretty familiar with this idea is actually in sports psychology. So for Olympic athletes, let's say for track, they know all the different steps that they need, from, being in position and hearing the starting gun and how they take off. They have every single part of that act programmed in their head. And even when they're not physically on the track, they will spend time running through it, picturing it, seeing it, making it real in their brain. And that's a lot of what we want to be able to start to do when we talk about like reprogramming our lives and the way we react to the world. Is we want to start to teach ourselves, by using our imagination and our affirmations, new ways to interact and new ways to see ourselves in this world. And one of the things that we know about behavior change, so this chapter on mindset is all within this class on binge eating and emotional eating. And those things really come from this idea of like people wanting to change their behaviors. And historically, so much behavior change was about no pain, no gain, and I just have to force my way through whatever it is that I'm trying to teach myself. And so positive psychology, and the field of positive psychology, has really taught us that people, humans, adults and children, learn best through gentleness and positive reinforcement. So when we think of willpower as the energy to force ourselves into making a new choice, we're going to run out of it. Control, exertion, restraint, all of those things are very limited resources. People are already worn out, tired, worried. We don't have infinite resources of these forceful things that like coercion and dominance and militant no pain, no gain. So positive psychology is this idea of gentle encouragement, and it's often like a reverse psychology. When you are a few minutes away from finishing, or a little while away from finishing like a project, and you sit there and encourage yourself, you're like, oh, I'm so close, I'm doing good, I've just got 15 minutes left. That's going to go a lot further than you saying, oh, I should have been done 30 minutes ago. What's my problem? I'm always so slow. The energy of those two examples is vastly different. And one of them is generative and the other one is closing and shutting down. And so what we want to really think about, like, what is magnetic, what is generative? And that's where we're starting to talk about like positive psychology, when we're really aiming towards creating the right environment for change. And so much of this is really related as a counterbalance to what we call the inner critic. So think about how many times a day that your inner voice beats you up, calls you names. Think about the way you talk to yourself and if you would actually talk to anybody else so roughly. Notice how you respond to yourself when you step on the scale, or if you pinch parts of your body, or if you berate yourself for eating or not exercising. So that inner critic can come up so many different ways of just self-attack. And the inner critic is really painful. And the pain in this context, here's a new way to think about it, is that the pain that comes from the inner critic is actually your body's warning signs that you've just had a false belief. If you are in a place of self-attack and you're saying, I'm so dumb, I'm so stupid, I'll never learn this, that feels bad. And a lot of people interpret that bad feeling as a resonance of like, oh, it must be true. Yeah, I think that thought and I feel bad. That it's confirming. But a total inverse way of understanding this is if you think to yourself, what's wrong with me? I'm so dumb, I'm never going to learn this, and it feels bad. That bad is almost more akin to like a red alert. It's an alarm system saying, I've just had a false belief, I'm going the wrong direction. It's like when your GPS is mapping you from one place to the next and you get off the road. And it lets you know that, oh, wait, I need to reroute. I'm going the wrong direction. So that negative feeling is a sign that you need to reroute your programming and find a new belief or a new way to talk to yourself. So nothing is beyond criticism. I'm not saying that you should never have difficulty with yourself or figure out ways to want to encourage yourself to do things differently. But criticism that blames, shames, shuts you down, all of those things, we want to do a lot of work to help get rid of the inner critic, to first of all, like change the radio station, turn the volume down, and to replace it with compassion and curiosity. And you will see so much more growth and change and inner peace when you find new ways to prune back this inner critic voice. It's helpful to understand that the inner critic got its start by actually trying to help. Sometimes people think of the inner critic as like the bossy older sister. Oh, what's wrong with you? You know you shouldn't have eaten, that second granola bar. But so it's trying to help. You can acknowledge that, but it's trying to help in a way that actually causes more pain, that causes limitations, because we don't change because of guilt, force. We don't change because of deprivation or punishment. I included this graphic of a little kitten being rescued from a tree. You have to think about yourself as like a scared baby kitten. If you've got a kitten in a tree or hiding under a bed and you're yelling at it, all it's going to do is cower and hide and move away from you. But if you can be gentle and encouraging and talk softly, your inner self will start to soften and bloom, and your strengths will come forward in a much more like holistic way. The inner critic's true purpose is to protect us from harm. It's to help us learn from our mistakes. Honestly, it helps us and it wants us to find like belonging or love. So if your inner critic is like, oh, why I don't like how I dress, I'll never find a date this way. Like it's aiming towards your desires for love and connection. But again, it's become misguided. Shadow work. Shadow work is about our ability to look at the repressed parts of ourselves. So if we're taught as children, as we often are, to be good little boys and girls or good children, that starts this idea that parts of us are good and parts of us are bad. Parts of us are worthy and parts of us are unworthy. And so we learn at an early age to start to shove down and repress parts of ourselves that we think aren't accepted or aren't okay. And so when we talk about doing shadow work, what we're talking about is to be able to start to hold ourselves instead of good and bad, but as whole, as all these different parts, even the parts that you think are unacceptable. And the more that we can start to do what's called shadow work and to give attention to these repressed parts, we often see that they're not exactly what we think they are. When a repressed part is ignored and shoved down, it starts to give us this idea that it's like some kind of monster in the basement. But yet when we turn on the lights and actually look directly at it, we can start to see, oftentimes like, these are pieces of my old pain, or these are parts of myself I didn't understand. So shadow work is a way to think of holistically making space for all the aspects of who you are. Here's a whole new aspect to mindset, and that is cognitive distortions. So cognitive distortions are patterns of thinking that lead people to perceive reality in an either inaccurate or unhelpful way. And they cause negative emotions, they reinforce negative beliefs, they interfere with problem solving and decision making. And there's more than these that are listed here, but these are some of the really obvious ones that are categorized out there that we just see people regularly falling into. You can think of black and white thinking, meaning like, I'll never succeed. Jumping to conclusions. Let's say you're in the office and the boss's door is closed. Like, the boss never wants to talk to me. Things like this. These are different categories that our brain can filter into that starts to like limit our ability to actually see what's true and what's happening. So if you jump to conclusions thinking, the boss is always mad at me, well, that's leaving out this idea of like, maybe the door is closed just because they needed privacy or silence. Another thing that I would add to this list is like absolute thinking, like I must lose weight by my class reunion or I won't be able to go. You want to be able to start to look and be observant in your thinking about for like musts, oughts, shoulds, I need to, I'm supposed to, I have to. These are kind of absolutist thinking. And part of how you want to change that is to say like, it's okay if I lose weight. It's okay if I don't lose weight. I may be able to lose weight for this college reunion in this example. I don't have to. It's not black and white. So there's actually a handout that I'll include on cognitive distortions that gives some real specific ways to like counterbalance them, because these can get really ingrained and hard to catch. When you start to see yourself in the habit of cognitive distortions and you want to actually interrupt a thought, there are some interesting experiments, like thought experiments, you can do to help reprogram yourself. So one of the fun ones is to put the negative stuff in a box. And you want to actually visualize a box, imagining it's got a place on your bookshelf. And when you find yourself having that thought and you catch it, imagine you can take that thought and put it in that box. Or you could imagine it going out the window, going out to the street and taking a bus. So you're kind of like depersonalizing it. You're taking it out of your brain and your imagination and you're sending it away. And that's one way. I know it sounds silly, but it's a really powerful way to start to interact and interrupt this process. The opposite of cognitive distortions is the possible thinking. So we often think like, what if everything goes wrong? Or what if I get fired? But we don't often use the what ifs in a good way. Like, what if everything goes well? And even if that doesn't feel relatable or doesn't resonate, it's still a really powerful thought exercise to put yourself through. Number 3, actively work to depersonalize things. When you catch yourself saying, I am stupid, take a moment to reframe that and you allow yourself, you can say, I feel stupid. I am bad versus I did something bad. I know that that's a really kind of general statement, but we want to take away the I ams. You can allow the feelings, but the I am can cause a lot of attachment to these things as far as like ingrained negative beliefs. And when it comes to like the inner critic or the cognitive distortions, if you wouldn't say it to a friend, make a rule that you're not allowed to talk that way to yourself. Many people find some help when you give that inner critic a name. You know, sometimes people think of it as like that older sister, but you might call it the boss. That's another idea. But when we can start to kind of give that part of ourselves a name, it also helps us identify it quicker and then take some space from it. And this sounds simple also, but pick up the phone. So if you're lost in a spin around shame or not feeling good enough or judging yourself or wanting to blame yourself about something, pick up the phone and actually call a friend and share that with them. Because when we start to break these secrets and we bring it out into the light, it's a lot easier to kind of see it for what it is. This is something that I like to share with people from author Kate Byron. She calls her work The Work, and she's known for these 4 questions, and they really apply to cognitive distortions in the inner critic. You want to ask yourself, is it true? Do I know absolutely that it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? And who would you be without that thought? So let's say the example is, I'll never, get the promotion at work. Well, do you know that's true? Do you know it's absolutely true? What happens in your body when you think, I'll never get that promotion? And then imagine who you'd be without that thought. So this is a good way to start to challenge some of the automatic thinking and the assumptions that our brain spits out. And here are some examples. They're a little bit different than cognitive distortions. They fall into the category of limiting beliefs. And limiting beliefs often are categorized as either as defectiveness, safety, or power. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I don't belong. I'm ugly. I can't trust anyone. It's not okay to show my emotions. That one's an example of safety. I can't get what I want. I can't trust myself. I can't handle it. I'm powerless. I have to be perfect. Take a moment to look at these limiting beliefs and notice which ones you really identify with. And if you have limiting beliefs that are actually more personal, more specific to you, take a moment to acknowledge that, write them down, see them in print. And I'm going to lead us into another aspect that comes up a lot when we're talking about reprogramming ourselves. And that's this idea of secondary gains. So sometimes when we want change, part of us might want change, but we might also fear change. So, for example, if you're depressed and you don't want to be depressed anymore, that's understandable, but yet that then creates an unknown. How will I feel if I'm not depressed? Or will people ask me more of me when I'm not depressed? And it can kind of be a resistance that gets in the way, a block of us creating change. So, for example, somebody might want to heal their relationship with their body, but yet they also have found that maybe having a larger body helps them avoid sexual exploitation or people flirting with them. And so subconsciously, having a larger body also is fitting a need. Sometimes people subconsciously just feel more at home in a larger body. They feel safer there. And so even though part of them is saying, I want to change my body, there's another underlying need or a secondary gain that having a larger body feels better. There's many different examples of this. A secondary gain that's not a body-based, let's say being sick. If you're sick, Nobody wants to be sick, that's true, but if that means you don't have to go to school or work, there's kind of a secondary gain there. It's kind of, there's something nice about not having to go to work or have your responsibilities. And then having to get better means you have to face those responsibilities again. And so that can be part of like that self-sabotage or the blocks that happen if we don't recognize these secondary gains. And that's really why this slide is here. We want to be able to acknowledge where we have resistance or blind spots to our growth and our change. Because our ability to address these and really honor these secondary gains, this is not at all about shaming them, but we want to honor them so that we're really meeting all of our needs. Once we're met our needs, then these kind of secondary gains or self-sabotage, they will start to dissipate. Here are some common secondary gains: fear of change, fear that your identity will be different if you heal, fear that you will lose attention or validation. So for example, if somebody's sick or depressed, in their family context, maybe that means that they're getting some attention. And if they feel better, then maybe they won't get that attention anymore and they're afraid of losing that. So oftentimes we get so identified with our own problems that even though we might not like them, we have a lot of comfort and familiarity with our problems. And so we can have some resistance to wanting them to change, just fear of the unknown. You know, and the identity and self-concept, that might be like, let's say your mask that you wear is always kind of like the clown. If you wanted to start to be more authentic and be yourself, maybe you're afraid that people won't like you so much if you're not always making jokes. Like, oh, what if my identity shifts? So this is just kind of a note to start to be aware of, that we all have resistance. We have blind spots, self-sabotage, and one of the ways to start to work with that is to ask yourself, is there some kind of hidden secondary gain that I'm getting from maintaining this old behavior? And when it comes to change, oftentimes we start to have this idea of comparison. Who else is doing it better? Who's more successful? Comparing ourselves to somebody else. And that game we never win the game of comparison. The game of comparison has no ending. So even if you lose weight, you'll always want to lose more weight. If you make a lot of money, you're going to find other people that are making more money, thinner, happier, all of these things. So you want to be able to keep your eyes in your own zone and focus on yourself. What brings me joy? What are my values? What do I need to do to feel safe? If you're trying to copy another person's life, you're not focused on your own work. So if you're caught in comparison and judgment outside of you, that's a sign that you need to be paying more attention internally. And let's bring up tolerance again in this chapter on mindset. If you remember when we talked about emotions and sensations, this idea that emotions come in, they get our attention, they increase and peak, and then they resolve to completion. Emotions move like this wave. The idea is that they're energy in motion. And what we want to do, even when we're talking about changing our mindset, is to be able to tolerate the sensations that come with different thoughts enough to be able to really look at them and to be able to sit with them. We want to be able to tolerate things without having to move into action or do something about it. Our mind tends to pull away from pain, just like our body would pull away from a hot stove. And yet, a hot stove, we are in danger. But when the mind is going into thoughts that feel scary or uncomfortable, you're not going to be hurt. So we want to be able to lean in. We want to be able to face and tolerate uncomfortable thoughts, uncomfortable sensations, uncomfortable feelings. Tolerance refers to the ability to accept and endure distressing emotions and experiences without trying to avoid, escape, or numb. And this is not about tolerating abuse or mistreatment or accepting and excusing harmful behavior. That's not the kind of tolerance that we're talking about. And within tolerance, what that brings us to is acceptance. Acceptance is this idea of it is what it is, whether I like it or not. And it's giving yourself permission to be exactly who you are. One of the first things we must face when moving into acceptance is this idea and perceived value of perfection. So perfection is only an idea. It's got no physical reality, no counterpart in the natural world. It doesn't even exist outside of our minds. It's an excellent example of how we create this like mental jailhouse. So assigning value to something that does not actually exist, like the perfect body or the perfect diet, it pulls you out of alignment with natural order, and it creates this suffering because you're trying to get something that does not exist. So acceptance is about looking beyond imperfections, and this part is really, really important when we're talking about counterbalancing the inner critic. We all have a deep wired need to be accepted and included. That's just part of who we are as humans, as social animals. The human species has survived millennia as like tribal people. And if you left the tribe, your chances of survival were slim. So acceptance, we're wired for it, but it doesn't actually, so what others think matters, but what you think about yourself matters the most. Your sense of self, it must be primary. And so it's really important to learn how to release this need to be liked by everyone else. And so what we're talking about here is choosing to no longer abandon yourself. The shadow work of bringing all of your parts into wholeness, reprogramming the inner critic, and then practicing acceptance of this is who I am, whether I understand it, whether I like it, this is what is. And there's so much more to be practiced within the fields of acceptance, because sometimes when it comes to acceptance, people feel like if I accept myself, then I'm really going to go off the deep end. I won't keep trying to like self-improve. And that's simply just a myth. Our ability to accept ourselves as we are, where we are, is actually that rejuvenating, compassionate, positive psychology aspect that helps us have the energy that we need to show up and to slowly, with curiosity and compassion, give ourselves what we need in order to like grow and heal. So again, this isn't about like change. It's about being able to give yourself that attention and awareness without trying to cut parts of yourself off. Number 2 is really saying that here. The fear with acceptance is that you'll give up and become complacent. Or there's the fear that if you practice too much acceptance, that you're going to be egotistical, narcissistic, selfish. And that one's actually really easy to discount, because I'll tell you right now, narcissistic people aren't worried about being narcissistic. So you can put that one aside. It's a good opportunity to check in and evaluate if you're having any black and white thinking about this place between like, oh, I'm either in like self-hate, inner critic versus narcissistic, because there's a lot of points on the way in between that really are the example of self-acceptance. And it's not black and white, just one or the other. One of the phrases that I was taught a long time ago that really helped me was this idea that there's a big difference between being self-centered versus centered in the self. A person centered in their own being is grounded internally. They form their own attitudes and opinions in addition to listening to the outside world. So if you don't have any internal communication system, you're just going to be lost in this multitude, this big sea of all these other views of what other people think. So we need to ground down into our own views of ourselves and like make that primary relationship, and then allow in these factors of like how you fit in your community and those reflections that come from other people. If you put everybody else first and yourself last, you're not going to know who you are. So as we start to wrap up this chapter, here's some experiments that you can do to start to embody the work that we're learning here. For 1 week, spend some time observing your own judgments about other people. When you're upset by other people's behavior, write it down and name that upsetting quality. And it's just going to help you notice your own judgments. A funny, non-thought way to start to break up some of that default network within your brain is to brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. Or if you normally walk fast, go for a slow meander. Just some ways to like kind of do things differently. If you normally sit at one spot at the kitchen table, sit somewhere else. Sleep on a different side of the bed. Sit in a different spot on your living room. Maybe even sit on the floor. Just start to do things differently in your life, and things that are kind of like low stakes, like whether you sit on the couch or the floor, if that's comfortable for your body. Start to do things that are introducing to your brain that there's change happening and that change is safe. And that change can be done on even a daily basis to help the brain understand that change is a welcome thing and that it's not threatening. So again, it's really fun and actually pretty hard to brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. And that's a great kind of way to start to work with this. That's besides all those heavy hitters we were talking about like inner critic work. And here are some reflections for this chapter. First, I'd really think you'll benefit a lot if you make a list of your limiting beliefs. You can take some time, write down the opinions you have of the 5 people closest to you. Make a list of advice you give to other people. Go back to that list of cognitive distortions and notice which one is most familiar. And then take some time to reflect on how that's colored your view of yourself and the world. Then ask yourself, how can you recognize, challenge, and reframe this distortion? Number 7, where do I feel especially blocked and unable to change or move forward? What could be the hidden fear or secondary gain? What beliefs or thoughts do I have that lead me to self-sabotage? What is my self-talk when facing a challenge or a setback? And finally, am I afraid of success or afraid of what others might think if I achieve my goals? Okay, thank you for completing Chapter 8.